Hi, welcome to week 9. We're going to talk about health data governance, committees, advisory boards, councils, lots of different names for the same thing, which is governance, policies, institutional review boards, and data use agreements. So let's start by defining health data governance. So governance is really around having a decision-making framework that governs health data access and use. It applies to clinical care, so taking care of patients in a delivery system, research, quality improvement projects, and public health reporting and surveillance. And governance balances innovation, ethics, privacy, and compliance, and it's really foundational to having responsible interoperability. Depending on your organization, you may find slightly different names for these governance committees, but just in general, you're going to find something similar to this type of framework where there would be a data governance committee. This committee looks at defining the ownership of data and determining access decisions. So who accesses what data from what type of environment, can the data be accessed remotely? Does it need to be can they access the data through a local computer? Does the data need to be masked? Does it need to be accessed through a more controlled environment, like a HIPAA compliant VPN or Citrix machine or something like that? There's typically a clinical informatics council, and they focus on documentation and workflow standards during patient care. There's a research data governance board, and they have oversight over the secondary use of data. So data that's been primarily collected during the patient care encounters being used for a secondary reason, which could be anything from research to quality improvement initiatives to population health or public health surveillance. A security and privacy committee that manages risk and compliance. Sometimes that's actually not a committee, but is governed by a institutional privacy officer or compliance officer, and then an AI or AI Analytics Council. In the case of Temple, the AI governance is handled from a separate committee that is part of the IRB process. So different governance policies. Again, this is something that is typical, but maybe slightly different in different organizations. Data access and authorization policies, data classification and sensitivity tiers. So for example, classifying data, whether it is publicly available, is it proprietary to the organization, or is it sensitive, meaning it has protected health information and or personally identifiable information. Data sharing and disclosure rules, who can you share data with, what type of format, de-identified versus limited data sets, who can you disclose that data to, and if you have a data use agreement, who on that data use agreement can share that data with or disclose that data to. Data retention, how long do you keep that data, and destruction policies, how do you destroy that data, in terms of deleting it off of all the places where it's stored. Can you store it in the cloud? Can you store it locally? Those types of policies. And then AI and AI model governance policies. Institutional review boards, IRBs, there's typically one at every institution. Sometimes on multi-site projects, there will be like an overarching umbrella IRB. The purpose behind an IRB is to protect human subjects in research, and that includes the data about humans. And sometimes IRBs will manage non-research projects, and that gets to be a little bit of a gray area. An IRB protocol is required for all generalizable research. They review the risk, any consent that's needed, and data protections. A lot of times it's confusing when you have a quality improvement project or an operational project or public health surveillance or population health. And so it is always good to just run it by the IRB, run it by the privacy officer as well, if it's non-research, because if you want to be able to publish results from a quality improvement project or publish public health surveillance results, you do need to have that go through the IRB. The IRB may determine that they can provide a waiver if it's not research, or they can do an expedited review and deem it not human subjects research if you're just using de-identified data or counts. So a good rule of thumb, if it's for clinical care, you don't need an IRB. If it's for quality improvement, typically an IRB is not going to review that, but you do want to run it by the IRB if you're going to publish those results in a journal. If it's for public health reporting or public health surveillance, again, typically an IRB is not going to review that. They're not going to ask for a protocol, but you do want to run it by the IRB or the Human Subjects Protection Office just to make sure they can give you a waiver. And 100% of the time for research, an IRB submission is required. It involves developing a protocol, and the IRB will determine if it's exempt or if it needs to go through an expedited review or a full review. Data use agreements, DUAs, are legal agreements governing data sharing. It can be anywhere from a couple weeks to several months to get one written, approved, signed off, and fully executed. These DUAs determine what's permitted and what is not permitted. Like, can you share that data? Does it have to be de-identified? Can you relink that data? They specify the security and disclosure limits, and they are critical for external collaborations. So there can be governance bottlenecks. And so some of those can be from overlapping committees. Sometimes it is, stay in your lane. There can be a lot of political maneuvers. There can be bottlenecks because there's unclear authority. There can be slow DUA and contract reviews. Some projects may be misclassified as QI when they're really research, and there can be a lack of standardized intake workflow. So now I just want you to put yourself into a role-playing use case exercise. So take notes, because in a future session, we're going to share this out with the group. So I want you to think about the fact that you are an informatician. A researcher in your organization has requested OMOP data for a multi-site diabetes study. Now keep in mind, it's not like you're going to go get data from a place called OMOP. OMOP is the common data model format of the data. And so you're going to have to go out to the Odyssey, OHDSI website, and you're going to have to look at the documentation on the different variables and tables for data that is stored in the OMOP data, common data model. I want you to think about what variables would be needed for a diabetes study. You would have to go out and get a journal article to be able to pull that information. Determine which committees must approve the use of this data. Is an IRB required? Is a data use agreement needed? And what could the likely delays be? And so take notes on this. And just to sum everything up, good governance enables ethical, legal, and effective data use. Technology alone does not create trust. And strong governance can either accelerate or block interoperability. Thank you.